Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
This happened back when I was 13. Since I was involved but I wasn't the prime target here, I'm going to be using fake names for their privacy. I did get permission to share this though, as I feel like it's very important for people to hear. I had been invited to a friend's 14th birthday party. I will call him Sam. We actually used to live on the same block until the year prior, when his family had moved. He was still within the same school district though, so we never lost any time. Along with me, there were probably about a dozen kids there, boys and girls, and most of them I knew and were also friends with. The party went as planned. Everyone showed up. We played for a while in the backyard because it was huge. They had one of those play sets, a tire swing and some other things. And then we sang to Sam, had a cake and ice cream, and then opened the presents. After a few party games, we again were left to our own devices for a few hours. Everything was going great. Sam enjoyed his presents, and I got him a special Yu-Gi-Oh deck pack that came with a collector box. He got a special foil card in it that a lot of us were excited about, so that made me pretty happy alone. At this point, the party was dying down and some kids were being picked up, and at the end, there were probably about 6 of us left, all boys, and 2 of them actually lived nearby, so they were going to be there until their parents called them home. The other 3 of us, Jack, Kyle, and I, were going to be spending the night at Sam's. After it started getting dark, the 6 of us went inside and started dueling at the kitchen table. We were getting a bit loud and rowdy, I'm sure, so Sam's parents told us that we needed to quiet down. But we were boys and we were hyped up on sugar and some heated duels. So we had the genius idea to go back outside and play hide and seek. After a few pretty pleases, Sam's parents finally relented and then let us go. They told us that we could play for an hour, but we would have to check back in at that point. We ran out back as we shouted our okays and byes, ready to be the best hider. It was still the 6 of us at this point. The 2 neighbor boys, Charlie and Brett, wanted to play before they went home, and we had no problems with it. The more the merrier when it comes to hide and seek, right? The first couple of rounds went fine, and then it was my turn to be it. I counted down, then I started looking for everyone. Charlie wouldn't stop giggling, so I found him pretty quickly. Then I found Kyle. The way we play this though is if you can get back to the base or where you count down, you win or you're safe. So I caught Sam going back to the base and soon after, Brett. So I still had to find Jack. The others were standing around doing whatever while I continued looking. But I was starting to become stumped. Other than the playsets that I mentioned before, their yard had a small playhouse, a few things that belonged to Sam's dad that lined the outside of the shed and was covered with a tarp, and of course, the shed itself. The shed had a lock on it, and we knew that it was off limits anyways, so I knew that he wasn't there. The only other place that I hadn't looked was in the small patch of trees behind his house. It was separated from their yard from the house behind them. We didn't really say that it was off limits, but between the other sessions and no one hiding there, I guess we all assumed that we wouldn't. But I didn't have any other ideas, so I just went back to the others and I told them that I needed help. They all agreed to help and we spread out, looking over the yard again, all teasing me, saying that I just gave up. When he still didn't make an appearance, we all agreed that we should search the trees then. It was darker back there, as the lights on the porch and shed didn't reach that far. I think we were all trying to be brave, but I know I was a little creeped out. But to make it even worse, we still weren't finding Jack. We started to address it among ourselves that we were concerned, but we didn't know what to do. Should we go tell his parents? Or should we just continue looking? Could he be playing some elaborate prank? And right as we were about to walk back to the house to tell them, we heard what sounded like someone whimpering or crying. This scared us even more, but we became worried that Jack was out there, but maybe he was hurt. We started looking closer, trying to make the light work as best as we could, until I tripped over what I thought was a rock or tree root. Until I heard the whimpering clearer. I looked over towards the tree, and I had just walked by, and when my eyes finally adjusted, I could make out a person. It was Jack. But this was not the way we last saw him. He had something on his head, and I realized he sounded funny because he was muffled. Then as I tried to help him up, he seemed to be stuck. So I again used my hand to trace down his neck, shoulders, and torso, and I felt some kind of rope. By this time, I had yelled to the others that I found him, so they came running over. I told them to help with the rope, and thankfully, it seemed to be a pretty simple knot that we were able to undo. We pulled off what was on his head, as well as the tape on his mouth, and the first thing he shouted was "Run!" And we all ran behind him towards the house. I could tell in his voice that he was terrified, and I was terrified too because I didn't know why we found him like that. He immediately ran to the living room where Sam's parents were, crying and visibly shaking, trying to explain to them what happened. I just remembered him saying, "Someone grabbed me, and they tied me up, and they put something over my head." And that he wanted to go home. Sam's parents thought that one of us did it, and took a few minutes before we finally convinced them. His dad then took us to the kitchen and made us a bowl of ice cream in hopes to calm us down. And his mom went to the living room and was talking on the phone. Shortly after, Jack's parents showed up and a few cops, so we had to go through everything again. I remember this because all of the rest of our parents showed up too, and I was becoming irritated. The cops questioned us all when our parents arrived, and they kept making comments about, "You know it's important to tell the truth," and "It's okay if you boys were just playing a prank, just tell us, you know?" We shouldn't have had to convince them so hard that none of us did this. Even Jake said that he was certain that it wasn't us. But while they were talking to us, they had other officers out in the trees taking a look. We weren't really told by our parents what they all found until we were older, and I can understand why. Jake remembered having something pulled over his head and said that someone covered his mouth, telling him not to scream. Then, they taped his mouth, tied him to the tree, and told him to count to 100. He counted to himself as he heard the footsteps fade slowly. He could hear faint laughing and talking from the rest of us, but we weren't close to the trees at that point. Then, about the time that I went towards the trees alone, he could tell that it was one of us, but since he hadn't reached 100 yet, he was afraid to call out. But when he started hearing all of us, that's when he decided to try calling for help the best that he could. With how terrified he seemed, I have no reason not to believe him or the rest of our friends. So, many years later, I was a teenager at this time. That situation came up, and they explained a bit more to me. They said, the cops that were searching the woods found something like a burlap sack, what was most likely over Jake's head. They also found rope and tape. But the most eerie part of this, however, was the note that was pinned to the sack. The note simply said, "Found you." And that's what convinced the police that it probably wasn't our doing after all. I mean, that had to be intentional, right? Leaving a prepared note like that. I know Jake doesn't really like to talk about it, unless he's in a particularly good mood, but I can't imagine what he had to go through. Who knows what this guy's intentions actually were? He must have been watching us at least, because that note was relevant to our game. But was that his whole thing? Just to scare us? As far as I'm aware, and from what I've heard from Jake and Sam, they never found who did it. They questioned the people on the other side of the trees, but it was just an older couple living there, and the guy walked with a cane, so I doubt that it was him. What I do know is for those of us who still talk and hang out, we will never forget the fear that we felt that night and that lingering dread that the guy may still be watching us somewhere. This happened my senior year in high school. My birthday is in May, and I usually have some pretty big parties with my friends. However, since we were going to be graduating that year, I told my parents that I wanted to have a graduation/birthday party all together. Well, I did have a lot of friends. I definitely wasn't in the popular clique, and I definitely didn't like having all the attention on me. This way, I thought that I could still have some friends over, but it would be all of us celebrating. Well, all of us, not just me. I was also hoping that my mom wouldn't try to make them sing to me this year. That was embarrassing after the age of like 14, at least for me. So thankfully, it wasn't hard to get them to agree, and we started making a list of things that I wanted to have, like food, drinks, as well as entertainment. I first wanted to have it at a park shelter since it was going to be nice out, and that way we could all take senior pictures together if we wanted. However, I also wanted to make it a karaoke theme. American Idol was a pretty popular thing at this time, and I watched it with my mom and sister every time that it was on, so I was pretty into it. And no, I don't think I'm a great singer either. It's just a lot of fun when you're doing it with friends. So we compromised, and my dad's friend actually agreed to let us use their bar for my party. Look, I know this sounds odd for an 18-year-old, but it was actually a nice place, and not like those gross sketchy bars you see in the movies. The couple that owned the bar were actually like an aunt and uncle to me and my siblings. We had been there during the day before and hung out in the back room if there was an emergency, and they were the only ones available to watch us. This was many years ago, of course, before I was older enough to babysit. Anyways, this was our plan. We would get the whole bar for the day. Then, he would still be able to get his normal business at night. I thought that it was a great idea, and I was really excited for this. My mom was still adamant on handing out invitations, since it's going to be somewhere other than our house, and RSVPs would make things easier, so I just agreed. I handed them out to my friends, to some acquaintances that I was getting to know already, and then I decided to be brave. I decided that I would try inviting my crush to see if he would actually show up, and if not, at least we were graduating soon and I would never have to see him again. I had a few classes with him, so as one of them ended, I walked by and I laid the invitation on his desk, and I walked even faster out of the room. I had to take some time to regain my composure after that, but then I just hoped for the best. Fast forward to the day of the party. I got up early to go with my mom to help set up and decorate the bar. We had some graduation banners. We had tons of finger foods, including some that Heather and Mikey, the owners, had made for the party. My mom even came up with clever drink ideas. She got the glass bottles of root beer and then cream soda and even made her homemade punch. I even agreed to her making a birthday cake as long as there was no singing. The bar was looking great, and I even had the karaoke machine set up, so I was pretty excited and I was looking forward to it. As people started to show up, we started getting a little rambunctious. However, I kept watching the door, hoping that my crush would walk in. And after about an hour into the party and not seeing him, I was a bit discouraged, but I told myself beforehand to not let that ruin my time. He didn't RSVP, so I had a feeling that he wouldn't show up anyways. So I just let it go, and we all started getting pretty crazy with the karaoke. We got so into it that I didn't realize that my crush had not only showed up, but was now standing near the stage, watching as I made a fool of myself. I was pretty embarrassed and ended up running off the stage laughing, and I went to get something to drink. While over there, I saw him looking past people, like he was trying to find me. But now, being completely shy, I didn't know what to do. So, as a teenage girl does, I avoided him a lot. After some time though, I did finally get the courage to talk to him. I talked to him occasionally in class, but this was definitely the most that I had spoken to him all year. At one point in the night, he asked me if I wanted to go walk around outside, and I agreed. I told my two best friends where I was going, and after we grabbed a cup of punch, we walked outside. I know, I probably should have told my mom what I was doing, but to be honest, I didn't want her to stop me, and I at least told my friends so that they would have my back. My parents were great, but I doubt that she would have even noticed with everything else going on around her. So, we walked around the parking lot for a while, and then we somehow ended up walking towards the back of the building, and I realized that he steered us in that direction. I didn't pay much attention as I was focusing on everything else, like how I looked, things that I was saying. Was I talking too much? Did I have some stain on my mouth from the punch or something? And just reminding myself to tell my mom that the punch may have gotten too warm because it was tasting bitter. My head was being flooded with everything at once, but then it all stopped when basically he admitted to liking me too. All I wanted to feel at that moment was happiness and like I had achieved something. I remember the fluttery feeling and almost like I was floating. Then, I remember the feeling of being kissed, and I was on cloud 9 at that moment. But that feeling started to shift when he started implying things. I don't want to be too graphic on here, but I'll just say that there was some groping, some explicit offers or demands that he was making, and I was finding myself overwhelmed and dizzy. I tried telling him no, but I found I seemed to be fighting myself more than anything. My arms felt heavy, and I felt like I was going to pass out right there where I stood. I tried to just zone out and leave my body for that moment until I started hearing my name. I recognized the voice as my dad's, and again, I wanted to call out to them, but I just wanted to sleep. And after that, my consciousness continued to go in and out, and I remember feeling like time had slowed down, yet I couldn't keep up with anyone. Unfortunately, I don't remember anything else until I was fully awake in the hospital later that night. My parents were there and they started asking me how I was feeling and what happened when I left the bar. After a lot of talking and repeating myself, we all pieced together the whole event. I already had a cup of punch, and before we walked out, my crush offered to go and refill both of our cups, and then we left outside. That's when I mentioned to them that it tasted funny. They already had a feeling about what had happened, or at least the doctors and nurses did. They called the cops and reported a potential drugging. Police arrived at my crashed party site and then they took samples of the food and drinks. And to our horror, they found traces of something in my cup. I did tell my parents how I ended up out there, and my crush didn't get far. There was a small cluster of trees behind the bar, separating it from the highway. They found him trying to hide out in the trees. However, he kept up with his claim that he didn't do anything to the drinks. The lab people, or whoever they were, said the drugs that were in my cup were consistent with sleeping pills. The authorities also found out that my crush's mom had been prescribed with some pretty strong sleeping pills, so it was assumed that's what it was. I was devastated. I had strong feelings for this person, and he tried to take advantage of me. I definitely understand now, and after the event, that he was not a good person if this was his first thought. But it was even worse at that age, knowing that he brought those with this intention. He didn't get very far before I started hearing my dad yelling for me. But to add to that part, I've never been more thankful for my little sister tattling on me. She saw me leaving the building and she started getting a really bad feeling. She claimed she didn't want me to get in trouble, so she checked out front to warn me to come back. But when I was nowhere to be seen, she became even more worried and then told my mom. That's when they started looking for me. I was pretty upset for a long time after that. I was embarrassed and disappointed in myself for falling for his tricks, for ruining my party due to doing something so stupid, and of course, having to explain all of this to my parents and to the cops. I was hoping to hear that he liked me too and maybe hold hands, but nothing more. I wasn't ready to do anything else, but I guess that's why he brought the pills. And to wrap up, I know he was kicked from school, or at least wasn't allowed to attend the graduation ceremony, so I don't even know if he graduated. I've put it behind me at this point, now that it's been years ago, but I'm definitely more aware of who I associate with, and my drinks never, ever leave my view. And as for my crush, I don't feel like he deserves to have a name in this story, but I hope that we never meet again. Back when I was in college, I used to do the thing that all early 20-somethings like to do: party. Like, a lot. Pretty much every weekend and week off from class, I was at a party somewhere in the nearby town. Yes, it was a dumb way to live, but I was all about having a good time, and I was trying to get the most out of life that I could. I've definitely gotten past that part of my life, and this story is actually part of the reason that I stopped partying, and mostly because it kind of messed me up mentally. This party that I was going to was pretty much like every other party. Too many people planning on drinking too much, and crashing on the host floor. Probably some illegal activities occurring that I won't mention because I'm not going to incriminate anyone. I actually knew the host, and I wasn't really friends with him, but I would say that we were acquaintances. When I say host though, it's probably important to note that I just mean the person that rents or owns the house where we are having the party. Because there were always a group of us crazy kids that would supply the party with all it needed. We just needed someone to give us 4 walls, some furniture, and a stereo. When I got to the house on the night of the party, it all looked like it was going to be one hell of a night. A bunch of my friends were already there, and the music was decent, and I was ready to let loose and have a good time. I walked in and immediately ran into the host, who we're going to call Robin for the story, and I went in for a handshake to thank him for letting us use his house, and to tell him how awesome he was. I started with a, "Hey bro, how's it going?" Just trying to keep it informal. And he literally just stood there staring at me with a blank stare. After a few moments of me reaching my hand out and him just staring at me like there was something on my face, several moments that were incredibly awkward, I may add, I just sort of readjusted and asked if he was okay. He kept that same dead stare and just shook his head slightly, saying, "No, Cody, I'm not okay." And then he turned to walk away from me without as much as a second stare. I was pretty obviously confused. This was an incredibly strange interaction that I didn't anticipate from Robin. He always seemed pretty chill, and I thought we were decent with each other to the point that he would accept my conversation. But here we were. I just shrugged it off. I just went back to the table to get something to eat and to get myself a second drink. I figured maybe he was just in a bad mood or something, and I wasn't wanting to let it ruin my night. After a while, I was just having a good time at the party, chatting it up with people that I knew. I actually asked a few other people if they had spoken to Robin or seen him that night, and everyone that had mentioned that he gave them the same cold shoulder, but they said that they just assumed that he was just having second thoughts about hosting the party. I agreed. That probably was the case, but the other side of that is that he could have just not agreed to be the host. In the end, I assumed that this was just going to be one of those parties where the host complained a lot after and no one was allowed to crash on the floor. We'd had a few killjoy hosts before and it was fine. It was his house, but it was still kind of a pain. Well, I thought that this was the case until what happened actually happened. This was about 2 hours into the whole party, and everyone was sufficiently loosened up, probably a bit too loosened up to be honest. We were all doing what we did when we heard what sounded like someone screaming from a closed room off the hallway. It was incoherent at first, but after a few minutes of it, I went over and hit pause on the music to see what the hell was going on. And as soon as I paused the music, the door swung open and out came Robin. He looked seriously mad, like he had an absolute scowl on his face, looking like he was about to beat the hell out of someone. We all kind of backed off from him as he walked out of the hallways and into the main room. Mostly because I think that none of us wanted to be the person that he took his anger out on. He stopped in the center of the living room, and all of us surrounding him and staring, and then he asked, "Who the hell turned the music off?" The whole crowd kind of looked around, but slowly fell off to the sides, pushing me toward the middle, basically singling me out. I just kind of shyly said, "Oh, I did. We heard you yelling and we wanted to make sure you were okay, man." I finished the sentence, and as soon as the last word came out of my mouth, I saw Robin lift his hand toward me, and I was met with the business end of a handgun. I could feel my heart speeding up. The people in the room started screaming and trying to push back, but no one really did anything to help the situation. Not that I would expect anyone to jump in front of a gun for me. I slightly lifted my hands, and I tried to tell him that I was sorry about turning the music off, that I didn't want any trouble, and that if he wanted, I would just leave the party and not come back. I was basically just trying to plead for my life at that point, because this guy that I didn't really know was about to shoot me. After several more seconds of silence, and me feeling like I was about to puke, he shifted his arm and put the gun to his own head, and then just gave us all a really messed up smile and laugh. It was almost cartoonish how creepy it was, like something the Joker would do. The whole room just sat still, and watched as he laughed and pulled the trigger. And I think there was a huge collective sigh of relief when nothing happened. He pulled the trigger with a gun against his own head, and as soon as it was clear that the gun wasn't loaded, he started laughing like an absolute psycho. Obviously, this was a huge party killer. We were all speechless and freaking out, and I was just trying to figure out how the situation was supposed to be funny. Obviously, he thought it was the most hilarious thing to ever happen, and I really think the whole room was ready to beat the hell out of him while he was just howling about how he got all of us and how we really thought that he'd do it. Yeah, dude, you had a gun, and rule 1 when it comes to firearms is to assume that it's actually loaded and that the person holding it intends to use it. Not to mention, you were acting weird and angry the whole night, and everyone in the room was a bit tipsy when you decided to put it in your head and pull the trigger. And without even saying a word, everyone pretty much just started filing out of the house, myself and my friend group included. We were done with the party. The whole time that we were exiting, he was just laughing and asking why we were all leaving, calling us lame and saying that we needed to learn to take a joke. In my opinion, pretending to commit suicide isn't a joke. Threatening someone else with a gun, loaded or not, isn't a joke. Nothing he did was funny, and I was seriously scared for my life. Like I mentioned, this was actually one of the last parties that I went to. Most of us pulled away from the party scene and just started doing hangout nights where a few of us met up and did whatever. There weren't any more big parties that year. So I guess I should say thanks to Robin for getting me away from the party scene, because he definitely did that. But I hope that he and I never meet again, because I will kick his ass if we do. And yes, I'm still holding this grudge. This was a few years ago when this happened, but I thought that it would be a good story to get out there. I'd gone to a party with a few of my friends and thought that it was going to be a good time, when it actually turned out to be pretty horrifying. I'm going to be honest, I'm not really sure where to begin with telling this story, because it's one of those really terrible events that was really messed up, and it affected a lot of people. I guess I'll just start by saying that my group was just myself and 2 of my longtime friends, and that the party was at the house of one of our longtime friend of a friend's that I'll call Jordan for the story. Jordan is a nice guy. I have known him for a few years, as have both of my friends. I only call him a friend of a friend or an acquaintance because I don't know much about him. Just that he's a pretty laid-back dude, likes to have a good time, and so forth. I have spoken to him a few times over the years, but he's the kind of person that if I spent more time around him, I would probably say he's a good friend. So, we got to his house a bit later than the start time of the party, and right off the bat, things seemed a bit downtrodden. We got there, greeted Jordan, and he just seemed like he was a bit upset about something. Like he was trying to keep the conversation with us short. I asked him if he was okay, and he said that he was, but then mentioned that his brother was at the party and that his brother had some issues. The way he said it was like, "So, you should avoid him because he's the problem." But without saying those exact words. It was like he wanted to warn us, but it was also his brother, so he didn't want to just call him out as being someone that we should stay away from. We told him that we would keep an eye out and make sure that if we saw anything, we would let him know. He then thanked us, and he seemed to change his tune a bit to one that was generally more positive and friendly. He walked us in and introduced us to a few people that he thought we would like to know. He showed us where the things were, and then took us out back where the larger group of people was mingling. We integrated into the group, just chatting it up with some random people, just getting to know others, and just generally enjoying the night. About 20 or so minutes into dancing and having a few drinks and catching up with some people that I actually recognized, we heard what sounded like someone yelling, and the words were being thrown out were not pleasantries. They were definitely aggressive comments. The whole group kind of stopped doing what they were doing and then turned their attention toward the house, where we saw Jordan and another man going off on each other. Based on his appearance, it was pretty obvious that the other man was his brother because they looked very much alike. And after a bit of back and forth, Jordan told the other man to get out of his house. The two of them shouted a few more unpleasantries at each other, but after a bit more exchange, his brother did leave. Jordan apologized to everyone for it. We of course all told him that it wasn't a big deal and not to worry about it. We all thought that it was just a family dispute and then moved on, thinking that it was over. Less than half an hour later, things had gotten back to normal for the party and everyone had moved on from the whole thing. That mood was pretty quickly killed when we started hearing more screaming in the house. And this time, not between people, but more like panic screaming. Of course, we all turned our focus to the house again, but this time, we could easily see what was happening. There was smoke billowing out of the front of the house, and we could see the people running out screaming and yelling to call 911. I watched as Jordan ran back in to see what exactly was happening, and he was helping get people out of the house while others were calling the fire department. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for the house to go from, "Oh, there's smoke," to, "Oh, there's not much of the front of the house left." The fire department got there as quickly as they could, but the fire quickly spread from the living room into the hallway and the kitchen, and it was rather destructive. A long story a bit shorter, they determined that the fire was set by what appeared to be a Molotov. Guests that were in the house said that they heard and saw something being thrown through the living room window, and when it crashed onto the ground, the fire seemed to go in all directions. And of course, you can easily assume who had thrown them. I learned that Jordan's brother had an addiction problem and had been staying with Jordan while he tried to get his life back on track. Apparently, he'd been doing pretty good, but he had been budging Jordan, asking for cash for whatever drug he was on. When Jordan said no, he got mad because it was a party, which meant he should be allowed to let loose. Jordan then told him that he could join the party, but anything he ingested needed to be legal. And of course, this put his brother on edge. The argument they had before his brother left was enough to send his brother over a very destructive cliff, and he decided to go find someone to help him get high, and then he opted to set his brother's house on fire in retaliation. He was pretty quickly caught too, because he didn't really leave after he threw the Molotovs. He'd actually stuck around so he could see the damage that he caused, and he was more than willing to confess it to the cops when they questioned him. Thankfully, by the end of this, no one was physically harmed. But Jordan lost his home, and what's worse, the only reason his brother was there was because he was trying to help him. It has been a while since this all happened. His brother is in jail, and the couple times that I've spoken with Jordan, he had been rather optimistic, considering the fact that his brother had burned his home down. The property was a complete loss, and he ended up having to stay with family and try to get everything sorted through insurance. But I don't know how that all ended up. I just hope that the property loss was the worst of it. I can only imagine how much it must have hurt Jordan to have his own brother destroy his life like that. I went to a lot of parties in my 20s, so when a friend invited me to another friend's party, there was no part of me that would have said no. The host, Danny, was more so just an acquaintance to me, but I wasn't going to pass up free access to alcohol and entertainment. The party was supposed to be at Danny's great aunt's house, as he claimed that he was house sitting and he wanted to take full advantage of it. However, you can imagine my surprise when I pulled up with my friend and Danny, and the house was boarded up and abandoned. I asked them if this was the right place and he said yes. He then explained that his great aunt had recently passed and she had been living in a care facility and no one kept up with her home, so it just sat there empty. He said that since it was still in the family, he thought that it would be a good idea to use it for parties. But what kind of party can 3 guys have in an abandoned house? I know none of us had brought any refreshments, and I'm sure that they noticed that I had a soured or disappointed look on my face, and they tried getting me to loosen up, saying more people were on their way. Shortly after, we did have a few more people arrive. There was another car with 3 girls in it, one of which I knew from high school actually, and a truck with another friend of mine and his girl, and a guy in the bed. The others got out carrying a couple cases of beer and cups, and we all walked up to the door where Danny was. And then, we watched as he went behind one of the bushes near the door, heard what sounded like metal on metal scraping, and then he came back out with a key. He then went and unlocked the door, slamming his shoulder into it as it appeared to be jammed, and then we all were waved in. The house, however, was in better condition than expected. It was still fully furnished, at least for the most part. It makes sense now as to why Danny had brought some old stereo with us. That way, we weren't sitting in silence and darkness. The lights didn't work either, so the girls had brought a bunch of candles and flashlights. Despite the location and the lack of details I was given, the party was actually pretty fun, and we all had a good time. We listened to music and drank. Someone brought a deck of cards and Twister, and it was hella funny watching the girls drunkenly try to determine which hand was left versus right. At one point, everyone started to wind down while a few were trying to make a house out of the cards. I got bored, and I just decided to walk around the property, inside and out, to check it out. Yeah, I may have been a little nosy, but it's not like I was a thief or anything. I legitimately just like exploring new places. So, as I walked around outside, I noticed where part of the house jutted out to the right. It caught my attention because it wasn't big enough to be a garage, but I didn't remember anything being on that side other than a closet and a bathroom. Not to mention, the part that went out was all connected, and the bathroom and closet were not. This had to be a separate room. I made a mental note of this, and I continued my walk around the house. There was nothing else particularly interesting, but I was still curious about that room, so I went back inside. I checked the bathroom first, but I had a feeling it wasn't connected to it since it was further back than where it was positioned outside. And then, I checked the closet. It seemed pretty silly at first when I opened it, and I just saw a few long coats hanging and a mop and a broom leaning against the wall. I was about to close the door when something inside me told me to look again. So, I moved around the boxes on the shelf above and didn't even see a door or anything. But then, I pushed the hanging coats as far against the wall as I could. Then, I pulled out my phone and I started looking at the rear wall. I then knocked on it, and wouldn't you know it, it sounded hollow, like there was nothing behind it. Then, I traced around the edges, and I could feel a slight dip in the wall. It was like someone plastered and painted over a door. While I was doing this, Danny scared me by coming up behind me and asking what I was doing. I explained what I had seen outside and what I just noticed in this closet, and he was just as surprised as me. I moved out of the way, and he went and examined it too and came out scratching his head. He said that he had only been here on occasions, but it was when he was younger, so he just never realized it until now. And before I could ask him what we should do, he walked away into the kitchen, then came back with one of those meat tenderizers and a butter knife. I grabbed a flashlight and I held it for him as he chipped away at the closet wall. It, of course, started getting the attention of the others, and we all joked about what we were going to find. Danny finally got a good portion around, so he pulled the rest down with his hands. And behind that wall was a small door with a very antique-looking doorknob. And of course, it was locked. Danny tried to just break it, but the angle wasn't right for it. When I say this door was small, I mean it was about half the height of the closet, which we were already having to lean over a bit to stand in. But what other option did we have? We were all about to start looking for another key, but Danny again just started smashing the knob with a tenderizer, and soon enough, it broke off. There was nothing else holding that door, so after he broke it off, it slowly creaked open an inch or two. We were all hesitant to go in, but Danny finally got on his knees and crawled through. I followed him, as well as a few others, but most of the girls stayed behind. This room was not something I would expect to see in the home of an old little lady. This looked like some kind of sacrificial room. There was a large circle with symbols around it, painted on the floor in red. The circle was then outlined with candles, and they had all been burned and melted nearly to the floor. The walls were covered in writings in black and red. Some of it looked like scriptures? I'm not sure. Others I didn't recognize and seemed to just be gibberish. There was a single wooden chair in the corner of the room, facing the corner, but otherwise, there was nothing else there. Well, except for one other thing. There was a single photo of a young woman. The photo had clearly been ripped or torn so that only this woman was in it, but it was clear that she was looking at someone to her left, and she looked very happy. Based on the color of the photo and how she was dressed, I'd have to guess that it was taken in the 40s. Danny said that he had no idea who the woman was, and I had no reason not to believe him. He said his great aunt was a blonde, and this person clearly had dark hair, so it wasn't her. Then, we all started getting that uneasy feeling. The mood had started to shift as we all started to see what this room was for, and Danny looked just as confused. He started swearing how he had no idea this was here and why anyone would do this. He said his great aunt was super religious, and he didn't, or couldn't maybe, believe that this could have been done by her. But then, the room got really cold. I didn't mention this earlier, but this was in the early summer. It was already getting pretty hot and there was no AC in this house either. So to have a random cold chill was eerie. The girls quickly left the room at that point, and I was about to ready to follow, but I waited to see what they did. As we stood around waiting to see what Danny wanted to do, we heard one of the girls yelp, so we all left the room. We went out and one of the girls said that it felt like someone slightly grabbed her ponytail and then tugged it, which kind of freaked her out. There was no way to calm them down, and the three that arrived together and the other girl all got in their car and refused to leave it. I could tell that Danny was pretty freaked out too, but didn't want to admit it, so he just suggested that we leave too if the girls were going. We all packed up and left, and the ride back was pretty silent. No one really said much, and I didn't really know what to say, to be honest. We kind of went about our life after that. Nothing creepy happened, no one was cursed or anything. But I even started hanging out with Danny more. We were both at a party together for months later, and something came up that reminded me of it. So I asked him if he ever found out who that person was or that room is. He seemed like he didn't really want to talk about it, but he did tell me that he asked his mom about that woman in the photo, and she basically interrogated him on where he found it and then told him to never bring it up again around certain people. I don't remember who, but that was about all that he told me. I don't know if he really found out more or if that's all he knew, but he definitely seemed uncomfortable talking about it, so I just never brought it up again. If I was alone, I would have taken pictures to share with you all because it was really creepy. But I didn't out of respect for Danny since I hardly knew him. But based on his reaction to it all, I'm pretty sure something bad happened there, and his family may be keeping secrets.
And here's the riddle for this video.
Hey everyone, this is your creepy sister. Thank you so much for watching the video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Also, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. It really helps the channel out. A big shout out to both my channel members and Patreon members. Thank you so much for taking your support to the next level. You guys are great. And again, to everyone, stay scared because your fear feeds me.